Welcome to World Talk Brief. If you were to walk through downtown Munich, Germany right now, you'd see something pretty striking. Posters for military drones plastered on buildings asking a simple question: why now? And then there's this slogan: Europe's security under construction. Think about that for a second. In a country like Germany, that kind of unapologetic display of military might would have been absolutely unthinkable just a few years ago. It really shows just how much things are changing. And it's not just a feeling, right? A recent poll shows that over 2/3 of Europeans feel their country is under threat. That's a huge number. But what's really fascinating is why they feel this way. It's like they're caught in a vice, squeezed between Russia on one side, China on another, and, well, an increasingly unpredictable United States. So, let's break this down. For the last 80 years, Europe has had this cozy security blanket, and it was provided by the United States. But what happens when that blanket starts to get a little threadbare? That's exactly what's happening now, and it's forcing countries, especially Germany, to completely reevaluate everything they thought they knew about their own defense. And you can really see this playing out in some pretty dramatic policy shifts. I mean, the German government is now telling its own citizens to keep emergency supplies at home, just in case. And with U.S. aid to Ukraine stalled, guess who stepped up to become the single largest military donor? Yep, Germany. This is a massive, massive change. All of this brings us to the big question, the one that's probably keeping European leaders up at night. Are the old alliances, NATO and the EU, these structures built for a different world, are they still up to the job? That question hung over everything at the recent Munich Security Conference. The stakes were incredibly high. And that conference wasn't just another series of meetings. No way. This was a real moment of truth. Every single eye was on the U.S. delegation. European leaders were desperate for some clarity on the one thing that mattered most. Where does the Trump administration really stand on its oldest alliances? And to understand why everyone was so on edge, you just have to look at the recent track record. This isn't about one little disagreement. It's a clear pattern. You've got insulted leaders, big tariffs, threats against a NATO ally's territory over Greenland, and then even temporarily cutting off intelligence to Ukraine. That was the backdrop for one very important speech. It's a reality that even European leaders are starting to say out loud. Germany's own defense minister basically admitted it. He said, hey, we got used to our comfort zone coasting on that American security blanket. And then he said, this time is over, definitely over. Okay, so let's go inside that room in Munich. Imagine the tension. The U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, steps up to the podium to represent the Trump administration. You could probably hear a pin drop. Everyone was just holding their breath, waiting for the message. And what they got was, well, kind of like two speeches in one. On the one hand, you had the nice, reassuring words, we want Europe to be strong. Our destiny is intertwined. But then came the but. A future partnership, he said, would be conditional. And the conditions are a really tough pill for much of Europe to swallow. Things like anti-climate action and a deep distrust of the very global institutions that Europe helped build. And listen to how one European diplomat, speaking anonymously, put it. Wow, that really tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? It captures the raw feeling in the room. This didn't feel like an offer of partnership, it felt like coercion. And it shows a level of distrust that a few nice words just can't fix. And when you dig into the details of Rubio's vision, you see why it's such a tough sell. Beyond skepticism of globalization, it promotes a new era of Christian Western civilization. It's also pretty telling that right after this speech in Germany, his next stops were Slovakia and Hungary, two of the EU's most Eurosceptic governments. So what was the fallout from this speech? Well, it was complicated. It basically split the continent. Sure, some leaders were just relieved the tone wasn't harsher, but what it really did was shine a huge spotlight on the fractures already running through European unity, highlighting just how different each nation's priorities are. This statement from the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is incredibly powerful. She's saying that for some of the EU's most important leaders, the damage is done. It's permanent. This isn't just a temporary fight. She calls it a shock therapy that has fundamentally changed how the continent sees the world. And you can see this division playing out in the hard numbers, especially on defense spending. The nations right on Russia's border, they're ramping up their budgets fast. Then you have France and the UK who are committed but are facing their own challenges. And then you look at Southern Europe, and they're really resisting the pressure to spend more. On top of all that, the message from the Pentagon delivered by the Undersecretary of Defense was crystal clear. The U.S. is pulling back its resources and presence in Europe because its top priority is now Asia. The demand for Europe is simple: stop being a dependent and start being a true partner.
So what is Europe supposed to do?
Well, it's being forced to write a whole new security playbook. It's a reluctant adjustment for sure, but it's a necessary one in a world where you just can't count on the old certainties anymore.
And here's what that new playbook looks like. It's basically a three-part plan. First, adapt to what some are calling NATO 3.0, one with a smaller American role. Second, go after strategic autonomy, which is just a fancy way of saying learn to stand on your own 2 feet. And third, start forming smaller, more flexible coalitions that can react way faster than the big, old alliances. And this isn't just a theory. It's already happening. You've got the UK and France leading a group to help Ukraine that includes non-European countries like Turkey and Australia. You've got Canada working with the Nordic states on Arctic security. The whole idea of who's in the like-minded family is getting much, much bigger than just the West. So the crucial takeaway here is that these aren't just short-term reactions. We are witnessing a deep, long-term shift in global politics. And it leaves us with the ultimate question. With the old world order gone, can a continent so often divided finally find the unity to build its own security? That is the question that will define Europe for decades to come. Subscribe to World Talk Brief for more clear, thoughtful explanations.